Did you know society taught you to chase money on the outside while abundance was quietly waiting inside? And did you believe that struggle was the only path to wealth when the real secret lies in your consciousness? In this video, you will discover how a single inner shift can transform your financial reality, why your imagination has always been the true factory of wealth, and how Neville Goddard's method allows you to feel the end before it manifests in your hands. This is where it begins, with the understanding that money responds to identity, not effort. This is how it unfolds, as you notice your private thoughts shaping every transaction and opportunity in ways you've never consciously recognized. This is where truth breaks through, when you see that fear and doubt have been silently scripting scarcity for you all along. This is why it matters. Because the self you assume determines the income and prosperity you experience. This is where illusion fades, as you realize that every struggle outside has been echoing a story you repeated inside. This is the turning point, when expectation replaces desperation, and confidence becomes the new magnet for money. This is where resistance softens, as the nervous tension of lack melts under the awareness of inner authority. This is how awareness sharpens when you perceive the invisible contracts you have signed with thought and feeling. This is where power returns, because once you own your identity, the world has no choice but to reflect it. This is the moment of clarity, when work ceases to be the master and imagination becomes the ruler. This is how alignment begins, as your inner language finally instructs the circumstances you wish to see. This is where fear dissolves, as scarcity loses its grip when confronted with deliberate assumption. This is the awakening, in which money stops being a goal and starts being the natural consequence of your state of being. This is where discipline transforms, from endless action into consistent inner cultivation. This is the unraveling of every inherited belief that struggle defines worth. This is the recalibration, where your system of thought begins to match the abundance you seek. This is the ignition of a confident inner authority that calls money to you naturally. This is the declaration that wealth is not a prize but a reflection of who you choose to be. This is the first step into a life where financial reality faithfully mirrors the identity you embrace. Picture for a moment the invisible self within you that has been silently scripting every financial outcome, deciding what arrives and what never does. And can you imagine the freedom of realizing that this inner identity has always held the pen to your prosperity? This is where it begins, with the subtle recognition that your income is not determined by effort, but by the version of yourself you carry privately. This is how it unfolds, as you notice your beliefs, feelings, and habitual assumptions quietly drafting the reality you experience outside. This is where truth breaks through, when you see that changing numbers without changing identity is like repainting a wall while leaving the foundation cracked. This is why it matters, because every coin, opportunity, and financial breakthrough is a reflection of who you assume yourself to be. This is where illusion fades, as you release the old story that told you money only comes to the deserving or the lucky. This is the turning point, when imagination becomes the laboratory in which your future income is already realized. This is where resistance softens, as old doubts lose authority under deliberate mental focus. This is how awareness sharpens, when you notice your habits are not merely routines, but evidence of identity at work. This is where power returns, because a conscious self-concept commands reality effortlessly. This is the moment of clarity, when expectation replaces pursuit and your inner self orchestrates external results. This is how alignment begins, as feeling, imagination, and certainty converge to magnetize abundance. This is where fear dissolves, when you understand that scarcity was only a reflection of untrained thought. This is the awakening, in which your financial reality becomes predictable because it follows the state you consistently occupy. This is where discipline transforms, from external struggle to internal cultivation of belief. This is the unraveling of every idea that effort alone can summon prosperity. This is the recalibration, as your perception begins to match the abundance that is already yours. This is the ignition of an identity that commands wealth without negotiation. This is the declaration that your inner self is now the authority over all financial outcomes. This is the first step into a reality where your income naturally mirrors the identity you assume. Now consider this. The countless hours society has convinced you to work harder, push longer, and prove your worth. And can you imagine discovering that all that effort was merely training your mind to accept limitation instead of commanding abundance? This is where it begins, with the realization that struggle is not the currency of wealth, but assumption is. This is how it unfolds. As you observe how every action driven by desperation reinforces the scarcity you claim to escape. This is where truth breaks through. When you see that money responds not to motion, but to the state of being you occupy before the motion even occurs. This is why it matters, because mastery of assumption turns invisible intention into visible results. This is where illusion fades, as the long-held belief that effort equals income dissolves before your awareness. This is the turning point, when imagining abundance replaces grinding for survival. This is where resistance softens, as you feel the tension of chasing lift from your shoulders. This is how awareness sharpens. When you recognize that every habit, every thought, every emotion is silently scripting your financial story. This is where power returns, because knowing the law of assumption allows you to influence results without forcing circumstances. This is the moment of clarity, when you understand that doing less in the wrong state produces less, and being more in the right state produces more. This is how alignment begins, as your mind and feelings settle into expectancy instead of anxiety. This is where fear dissolves, when the futility of struggle is replaced by the certainty of inner decision. This is the awakening, where imagination becomes the engine of your reality and effort merely follows. This is where discipline transforms, from pushing to choosing, from striving to assuming. This is the unraveling of every story that told you results require exhaustion. This is the recalibration, as your perception learns to anticipate wealth instead of chasing it. This is the ignition of a state where money naturally aligns with your assumption. This is the declaration that financial freedom has always been an inside job. This is the first step into a life where your conscious assumption writes the ledger before the world delivers. Suppose you discover that every word you speak to yourself about money, whether aloud or silently, has been constructing the reality you experience. And can you imagine the power of becoming aware of these private dialogues that quietly dictate your financial outcomes? This is where it begins, as you notice how self-talk, assumptions, and internal narratives silently govern every deposit, every opportunity, and every missed chance. This is how it unfolds. When the subtle phrases you repeat to yourself about scarcity, worth, or luck shape the very circumstances you attract. This is where truth breaks through, as you realize that external reality is only echoing the script written inside your mind. This is why it matters, because conscious redirection of inner conversations rewrites the blueprint of your bank account. This is where illusion fades, when you stop believing that income is dictated by effort alone and see it as the echo of identity. This is the turning point, where choosing empowering self-talk replaces unconscious acceptance of limitation. This is where resistance softens, as the habitual doubts that once blocked abundance begin to lose influence. This is how awareness sharpens, when you can hear the whispers of your inner dialogue and recognize which phrases attract prosperity and which repel it. This is where power returns, because the mind that speaks wealth calls it into existence effortlessly. This is the moment of clarity, when you understand that consistent thought and feeling are the architects of financial reality. This is how alignment begins, as your inner narrative becomes intentional, precise, and fully attuned to abundance. This is where fear dissolves, when you no longer allow scarcity to dominate the conversation within. This is the awakening, in which every internal phrase becomes a building block for real-life wealth. This is where discipline transforms from external action into mastery of inner speech and focus. This is the unraveling of every negative assumption that has kept money distant. This is the recalibration, as your self-dialogue begins to reflect confidence, expectation, and certainty. This is the ignition of a financial reality responding immediately to your chosen beliefs. This is the declaration that inner conversations are now the controlling ledger of your bank balance. This is the first step into a life where every thought, feeling, and word aligns perfectly with the prosperity you assume. Envision a world where money is not a distant goal, but a sensation that can be felt before it ever manifests. And can you imagine the subtle thrill of knowing that your inner feeling can sculpt reality faster than any action outside of you? This is where it begins, with the recognition that wealth is primarily an emotional state, and the body responding to that state is what draws circumstances to match. This is how it unfolds, as you notice how your current feeling about abundance attracts either opportunity or delay. This is where truth breaks through, when you realize that imagining the satisfaction of already having wealth changes the trajectory of income more effectively than any plan or strategy. This is why it matters, because feelings are the currency that reality accepts, and belief without feeling often goes unnoticed by life itself. This is where illusion fades, as you understand that waiting for external proof before feeling abundance is the very trap that keeps wealth away. This is the turning point, when you decide to live in the sensation of plenty even before your bank account reflects it. This is where resistance softens, as the tension between desire and reality disappears in the warmth of assumed prosperity. This is how awareness sharpens, when you sense the difference between wanting money and feeling as if it is already yours. This is where power returns, because mastering the emotional state of abundance creates a natural pull for money. This is the moment of clarity, when you see that consistent inner sensation attracts external results with unerring precision. This is how alignment begins, as your imagination, expectation, and feelings synchronize to form a coherent signal for prosperity. This is where fear dissolves, when lack is replaced by the certainty of inner satisfaction. This is the awakening, in which wealth is no longer pursued, but naturally manifests in alignment with your inner state. This is where discipline transforms, from chasing to consciously feeling and dwelling in abundance. This is the unraveling of old habits of impatience and doubt that once delayed prosperity. This is the recalibration, as your nervous system begins to resonate with the sensation of financial freedom. This is the ignition of a magnetic identity that attracts money effortlessly. This is the declaration that feeling wealthy precedes the experience of wealth. This is the first step into a life where the inner state is the command center and reality follows obediently. Think of the moment when every belief, expectation, and assumption quietly stored in your subconscious has been acting as a silent banker, depositing into your reality the balance that matches your inner account. And can you imagine the relief of realizing that controlling this inner bank unlocks limitless wealth? This is where it begins, with the awareness that your subconscious does not negotiate or debate. It simply manifests whatever you consistently believe and feel. This is how it unfolds, as you recognize the patterns, memories, and habitual thoughts that have been silently authoring your financial story. This is where truth breaks through, when you see that money does not obey logic or effort alone, but responds to the deep, repeated assumptions you carry. This is why it matters, because the subconscious is the invisible architect of your reality, shaping outcomes far faster than conscious planning. This is where illusion fades, as you realize that trying to convince the world with action alone is secondary to programming your inner self. This is the turning point, when you deliberately feed your subconscious the frequency of abundance and success. This is where resistance softens, as the tension between wanting and having dissolves under the clarity of inner alignment. This is how awareness sharpens, when you observe how tiny repeated beliefs, unchallenged, have been constructing your financial limits. This is where power returns, because mastery over the subconscious allows effortless attraction of circumstances that mirror your inner state. This is the moment of clarity, when you understand that your inner bank must be credited first before the outer world can reflect deposits. This is how alignment begins, as imagination, feeling, and belief converge into a single, unwavering authority over your prosperity. This is where fear dissolves, as scarcity loses its influence under consistent assumption of wealth. This is the awakening, where your subconscious becomes a loyal servant, manifesting every deliberate expectation. This is where discipline transforms, from pushing against reality to cultivating internal consistency. This is the unraveling of every hidden limitation that has prevented true financial flow. This is the recalibration as your mental and emotional systems tune to the frequency of abundant life. This is the ignition of a magnetic inner state that silently attracts opportunities. This is the declaration that the subconscious is your most faithful banker and ally. This is the first step into a life where what you hold inside determines every outer transaction. Ask yourself what happens when you begin to fully assume the reality of wealth as if it already exists. And can you imagine the subtle yet unstoppable magnetic force that begins drawing circumstances, opportunities, and people aligned with your assumed prosperity? This is where it begins, with the understanding that assumption is not wishful thinking, but a deliberate act of consciousness that magnetizes reality. This is how it unfolds. As you notice situations bending naturally to accommodate the state you occupy internally. This is where truth breaks through. When you see that money does not resist certainty and follows the unwavering belief you cultivate. This is why it matters. Because the outer world is a mirror, reflecting the depth and consistency of your inner assumption. This is where illusion fades, as the old narrative that earning requires struggle dissolves before your awareness. This is the turning point, when expectation replaces effort and attraction replaces pursuit. This is where resistance softens, as your certainty begins to override doubt and hesitation. This is how awareness sharpens, when you sense how invisible currents of belief have been shaping every financial outcome. This is where power returns, because conscious assumption creates an effortless alignment with opportunity. This is the moment of clarity, when you realize that living as if you already possess wealth calls it into existence faster than chasing it externally. This is how alignment begins, as thought, feeling, and imagination converge into a single, coherent signal for prosperity. This is where fear dissolves, when scarcity loses traction under the consistent energy of assumption. This is the awakening, where inner certainty transforms financial possibility into inevitable reality. This is where discipline transforms from endless striving into focused mental cultivation. This is the unraveling of every habit that once taught you to beg or plead for abundance. This is the recalibration, as your internal state becomes the reliable source of all outcomes. This is the ignition of a personal field of attraction that pulls wealth naturally and predictably. This is the declaration that assumed wealth is no longer fantasy, but the invisible architect of your life. This is the first step into a reality where money is drawn to the identity you embody. Consider the possibility that your mind already contains the reality you desire. And can you imagine stepping fully into the end result, feeling the satisfaction, freedom, and confidence of wealth before it manifests in the world outside? This is where it begins, with the understanding that living in the end means dwelling in the feeling of the wish fulfilled, allowing your consciousness to dictate the circumstances rather than the other way around. This is how it unfolds, as every thought, feeling, and subtle expectation begins to align with the state of abundance you assume. This is where truth breaks through, when you notice that imagining completion shifts events and people to match your inner reality. This is why it matters, because outer results are merely echoes of the inner state you consistently occupy. This is where illusion fades, as the belief that you must earn, struggle, or wait for proof dissolves into the certainty of what is already yours. This is the turning point, when satisfaction replaces longing and confidence replaces doubt. This is where resistance softens, as the nervous system relaxes into the security of assumed wealth. This is how awareness sharpens, when you see that the sensation of having already achieved your desire carries more influence than any external action. This is where power returns, because living in the end allows the invisible laws of consciousness to orchestrate results. This is the moment of clarity, when you understand that persistent imagining with feeling is the fastest route to manifesting. This is how alignment begins, as imagination, expectation, and emotion fuse into a coherent signal that attracts abundance. This is where fear dissolves, when scarcity and limitation are replaced by certainty and presence. This is the awakening, where life conforms to your internal state rather than forcing you to conform to circumstances. This is where discipline transforms from chasing outcomes to consciously embodying them. This is the unraveling of every story that taught you that you must wait or earn before experiencing. This is the recalibration, as your internal state becomes the foundation for external wealth. This is the ignition of a magnetic presence that naturally draws resources, opportunities, and success. This is the declaration that living in the end is the invisible law behind all manifestation. This is the first step into a life where the sensation of abundance precedes the reality of abundance. Can you imagine every step you take in daily life flowing effortlessly from the certainty of inner wealth? And can you see how even seemingly small actions carry amplified power when aligned with the state of abundance you maintain within? This is where it begins, with the understanding that action without alignment often produces scattered results. But when every movement is inspired by assumed wealth, life begins to conform naturally. This is how it unfolds. As decisions, conversations, and opportunities begin to synchronize with the inner signal of prosperity. This is where truth breaks through, when you notice that each act no longer feels like effort but a natural extension of your assumed state. This is why it matters, because outer results are the direct reflection of inner alignment, and without this harmony, outcomes remain unpredictable. This is where illusion fades, as the misconception that busy work equals wealth dissolves before your awareness. This is the turning point, when deliberate alignment transforms mundane routines into conduits of abundance. This is where resistance softens, as friction between desire and manifestation disappears in the confidence of conscious assumption. This is how awareness sharpens, when you realize that the quality of your inner state determines the quality of every external endeavor. This is where power returns, because when your mind, heart, and actions are aligned, circumstances naturally support your prosperity. This is the moment of clarity, when you see that success is not an outcome to chase, but a reflection of the person you are being. This is how alignment begins, as every choice, every movement, and every effort radiates the certainty of abundance. This is where fear dissolves, when doubt and hesitation are replaced by confident assumption. This is the awakening, where your life flows in harmony with the consciousness you maintain. This is where discipline transforms, from mechanical effort to intelligent, conscious action. This is the unraveling of every habit that once worked against your financial freedom. This is the recalibration, as inner authority guides each decision and interaction. This is the ignition of a powerful rhythm where manifestation follows naturally. This is the declaration that alignment precedes and dictates all results. This is the first step into a reality where actions flow effortlessly from the wealth you embody. Now consider this: the invisible currents of life that carry opportunities, resources, and wealth toward those who trust the unseen. And can you imagine surrendering control to a force that responds to inner certainty rather than external struggle? This is where it begins, with the understanding that abundance is always moving, but it only conforms to the consciousness that believes and feels it. This is how it unfolds, as you learn to release anxious grasping and replace it with deliberate expectation. This is where truth breaks through, when you see that the world reflects your state of trust or doubt with unerring accuracy. This is why it matters, because effort without faith often works against the natural flow of prosperity. This is where illusion fades, as the myth that wealth is earned purely through labor dissolves under the clarity of inner alignment. This is the turning point, when you begin to feel the subtle flow of money moving toward you effortlessly. This is where resistance softens, as impatience gives way to quiet certainty. This is how awareness sharpens, when you notice opportunities presenting themselves without forcing circumstances. This is where power returns, because trust amplifies the magnetic force of your assumed state. This is the moment of clarity, when you recognize that surrender is not weakness, but a conscious alignment with the laws of consciousness. This is how alignment begins, as expectation and belief harmonize to create a consistent stream of prosperity. This is where fear dissolves, when you stop fighting reality and start guiding it from within. This is the awakening, where patience is no longer passive, but an active state of confident assumption. This is where discipline transforms, from anxious effort to relaxed, deliberate focus. This is the unraveling of every story that taught you wealth must be chased. This is the recalibration, as your nervous system aligns with the invisible currents of abundance. This is the ignition of effortless attraction, where life supplies in perfect measure. This is the declaration that trusting the invisible is the key to unlimited prosperity. This is the first step into a life where faith in unseen forces orchestrates every material gain. Picture for a moment the sensation of richness not as a distant achievement, but as a present reality. And can you imagine how every mundane moment becomes infused with the energy of wealth when you allow yourself to truly feel it inside? This is where it begins, with the understanding that abundance is first an internal sensation, and the external world merely reflects what is held within. This is how it unfolds, as you notice the subtle joy, gratitude, and expectation arising naturally when you dwell in the feeling of already being prosperous. This is where truth breaks through, when you realize that living as though wealth is present reshapes circumstances effortlessly. This is why it matters, because the mind responds first to the inner state, then organizes life to match it. This is where illusion fades, as the idea that you must wait for wealth before feeling it collapses under the certainty of inner experience. This is the turning point, when every thought, action, and emotion harmonizes with the reality you assume. This is where resistance softens, as tension between desire and reality disappears into the calm confidence of feeling rich now. This is how awareness sharpens, when you detect the subtle shifts in opportunities, synchronicities, and responses around you. This is where power returns, because feeling wealth attracts tangible results faster than striving alone. This is the moment of clarity, when you understand that abundance is a vibration, and aligning with it changes everything. This is how alignment begins, as your body, mind, and emotions synchronize with the sensation of having already arrived. This is where fear dissolves, when scarcity loses its grip under consistent inner enjoyment of abundance. This is the awakening, where every action becomes an extension of the feeling you hold within. This is where discipline transforms from external chasing to internal immersion. This is the unraveling of every habit that prioritized future attainment over present experience. This is the recalibration, as your nervous system tunes to the frequency of wealth as a constant companion. This is the ignition of a magnetic energy that naturally draws resources and opportunities. This is the declaration that feeling rich precedes reality and is its most powerful catalyst. This is the first step into a life where inner richness dictates every outward manifestation. Suppose you discover that every message, belief, and cultural story about lack that you've absorbed since childhood has been secretly scripting your financial limitations. And can you imagine the liberation that comes when you finally recognize and override these hidden programs? This is where it begins, with the awareness that scarcity is not a fact but a conditioned perception that can be replaced with deliberate assumption. This is how it unfolds, as you begin to notice the old narratives repeating in your mind and consciously rewrite them with thoughts of abundance. This is where truth breaks through, when you realize that your inherited beliefs about money are not your own and can be discarded without consequence. This is why it matters, because letting go of programmed scarcity opens the doorway for unimagined opportunities and wealth. This is where illusion fades, as the conviction that life is limited gives way to the certainty of limitless possibility. This is the turning point, when inner authority overrides old fears and confidence begins guiding your financial reality. This is where resistance softens, as mental friction created by inherited scarcity slowly dissolves. This is how awareness sharpens, when you detect the subtle ways old programming sabotages your financial choices. This is where power returns, because consciousness, once freed from outdated beliefs, becomes a magnet for abundance. This is the moment of clarity, when you realize that wealth is not something to earn externally but something to be assumed internally. This is how alignment begins, as you replace scarcity thoughts with consistent images, feelings, and convictions of plenty. This is where fear dissolves, when the stories that once limited you no longer hold authority. This is the awakening, where your internal state creates a predictable, abundant external reality. This is where discipline transforms from avoiding lack to cultivating certainty of wealth. This is the unraveling of every subconscious program that once dictated limitation. This is the recalibration, as your mind begins to operate from a new set of beliefs aligned with abundance. This is the ignition of a life where old scarcity no longer influences outcomes. This is the declaration that freedom from scarcity is the first act of true wealth creation. This is the first step into a reality where abundance is your default state. Envision a world where your imagination is not idle daydreaming, but the most powerful engine driving your financial reality. And can you imagine directing every detail of your life through deliberate mental scenes that feel utterly real? This is where it begins, with the recognition that visualization is not optional. It is the conscious blueprint that your subconscious translates into material outcomes. This is how it unfolds, as you begin creating vivid, emotionally charged mental movies where your desires are already fulfilled. This is where truth breaks through. When you notice that the more detailed and felt your mental images, the faster reality begins to reflect them. This is why it matters, because consistent, immersive imagination overrides doubt and accelerates manifestation. This is where illusion fades, as the belief that reality is fixed or slow dissolves under the power of deliberate visualization. This is the turning point, when seeing your goals as already achieved ignites belief and expectation within every fiber of your being. This is where resistance softens, as hesitation and uncertainty are replaced by vivid certainty. This is how awareness sharpens, when you notice how imagination directly influences your actions, decisions, and energy. This is where power returns, because controlling your inner scenes gives you control over outer results. This is the moment of clarity, when you understand that mental rehearsal is not fantasy, but a practical tool for creating wealth. This is how alignment begins, as imagination, feeling, and belief synchronize to magnetize circumstances. This is where fear dissolves, when you trust that what is held internally will manifest externally. This is the awakening, where each visualization becomes a seed that grows naturally into real-life abundance. This is where discipline transforms, from sporadic daydreaming to consistent, purposeful imagining. This is the unraveling of old habits that left your goals vague or unformed. This is the recalibration, as your subconscious begins responding immediately to the richness you imagine. This is the ignition of a powerful inner engine that propels you toward wealth. This is the declaration that visualization is no longer optional but essential. This is the first step into a life where imagination dictates the flow of prosperity. Think of the moment when every limiting belief you've carried about money begins to unravel. And can you imagine the profound freedom of knowing that your convictions, once rewritten, become the invisible force directing wealth into your life? This is where it begins, with the recognition that beliefs are not truths but assumptions, and changing them changes your reality. This is how it unfolds, as you identify each thought that restricts abundance and consciously replace it with certainty of prosperity. This is where truth breaks through, when you notice how quickly external circumstances respond to these renewed convictions. This is why it matters, because the speed and ease of financial breakthroughs are determined by the depth and consistency of your inner belief. This is where illusion fades, as the old idea that money is scarce or hard to earn dissolves under the authority of new mental programs. This is the turning point, when commitment to revised beliefs replaces hesitation and doubt. This is where resistance softens, as subconscious resistance gives way to conscious choice. This is how awareness sharpens, when you recognize the subtle ways old beliefs shape past results. This is where power returns, because a consciously rewritten belief system aligns all aspects of life with abundance. This is the moment of clarity, when you see that every wealth limitation is self-imposed and fully reversible. This is how alignment begins, as your inner dialogue consistently reinforces expectation and certainty of prosperity. This is where fear dissolves, when trust in your reprogrammed mind overrides anxiety and uncertainty. This is the awakening, where each belief becomes a reliable generator of tangible results. This is where discipline transforms, from doubting or resisting to deliberately cultivating empowering convictions. This is the unraveling of patterns that previously attracted lack or instability. This is the recalibration, as your mind and subconscious settle into the vibration of wealth. This is the ignition of a state where financial abundance is the natural outcome of your inner authority. This is the declaration that your beliefs are now your primary source of wealth. This is the first step into a life where money flows in direct proportion to the strength of your inner convictions. Ask yourself what happens when you stop trying to acquire wealth externally and begin to embody the very identity of a millionaire. And can you imagine how effortlessly opportunities, decisions, and resources align with the person you now choose to be? This is where it begins, with the understanding that wealth is less about money and more about the state of being you inhabit internally. This is how it unfolds, as every thought, word, and action begins to reflect the confidence, decisiveness, and expectation of a prosperous individual. This is where truth breaks through. When you notice that life responds not to titles or bank balances, but to the frequency of the identity you assume. This is why it matters, because assuming the millionaire's identity magnetizes experiences, relationships, and circumstances that mirror it. This is where illusion fades, as the belief that you must wait or earn externally dissolves under the clarity of embodied assumption. This is the turning point, when you consciously live, speak, and think as if financial mastery is already yours. This is where resistance softens, as old insecurities and self-doubt lose their grip over your actions. This is how awareness sharpens, when you recognize how identity, not strategy, dictates the flow of money. This is where power returns, because living as the person you intend to be commands circumstances to conform. This is the moment of clarity, when you understand that external wealth follows inner alignment, not the reverse. This is how alignment begins, as daily habits, decisions, and even posture reflect the consciousness of abundance. This is where fear dissolves, when insecurity and hesitation are replaced by certainty and self-assuredness. This is the awakening, where embodying prosperity becomes the most effective manifestation tool. This is where discipline transforms, from forcing outcomes to naturally expressing abundance through being. This is the unraveling of every action that previously contradicted your desired identity. This is the recalibration, as your internal state consistently mirrors the millionaire consciousness. This is the ignition of a magnetic presence that naturally attracts wealth, respect, and opportunity. This is the declaration that identity is the most powerful lever of financial reality. This is the first step into a life where who you are internally dictates everything you experience externally. Consider the possibility that the world you see around you is nothing more than a reflection of what you assume to be true. And can you imagine the profound effect on your finances when every assumption you hold is consciously directed toward abundance? This is where it begins, with the recognition that assumptions, not circumstances, are the true architects of your reality. This is how it unfolds, as you notice that what you consistently imagine and feel as true manifests externally without fail. This is where truth breaks through, when you see that every financial limitation experienced in the past was a direct result of unconscious assumptions. This is why it matters, because once you assume wealth as your natural state, the world must conform to that reality. This is where illusion fades, as the belief that external conditions control income collapses under the certainty of inner conviction. This is the turning point, when deliberate assumption replaces passive hope and transforms desire into certainty. This is where resistance softens, as doubt loses its authority over your mental state and external circumstances. This is how awareness sharpens, when you perceive the alignment between what you feel to be true and what appears in life. This is where power returns, because controlled assumptions magnetize opportunities, resources, and money effortlessly. This is the moment of clarity, when you realize that consistent inner assumption is the fastest path to financial mastery. This is how alignment begins, as imagination, expectation, and belief synchronize into a coherent directive for wealth. This is where fear dissolves, when insecurity and hesitation are replaced by certainty in the unseen. This is the awakening, where the law of assumption becomes your primary tool for manifesting prosperity. This is where discipline transforms from chasing results to consciously directing assumptions. This is the unraveling of every limiting story previously accepted as reality. This is the recalibration, as your consciousness begins to operate in full alignment with abundance. This is the ignition of a magnetic state where wealth flows naturally to match inner certainty. This is the declaration that assumptions are now the controlling factor in your financial life. This is the first step into a reality where financial abundance is the inevitable reflection of your inner state. Envision a world where every feeling of gratitude you hold acts like a beacon, amplifying the flow of abundance into your life. And can you imagine how effortlessly opportunities and resources align with the energy of sincere appreciation? This is where it begins, with the understanding that gratitude is not merely polite acknowledgement, but a powerful frequency that resonates with wealth. This is how it unfolds. As you consciously notice and feel thankful for every current blessing, small or large, allowing this energy to permeate every thought. This is where truth breaks through, when you realize that the act of appreciating what you already have multiplies its presence and attracts even more. This is why it matters, because abundance responds to the vibrational signature of your emotions, and gratitude is the highest signal of prosperity. This is where illusion fades, as the idea that wealth is only external dissolves under the clarity of inner acknowledgement. This is the turning point, when appreciation becomes a daily practice that shifts your consciousness toward consistent abundance. This is where resistance softens, as dissatisfaction and lack lose their influence over your thoughts and feelings. This is how awareness sharpens, when you observe how noticing even small blessings triggers exponential attraction. This is where power returns, because a grateful mind is magnetic and aligns naturally with opportunities. This is the moment of clarity, when you understand that the more you appreciate, the more life delivers in kind. This is how alignment begins, as gratitude harmonizes your inner world with the frequency of wealth. This is where fear dissolves, when worry and scarcity are replaced by a constant feeling of satisfaction. This is the awakening, where each expression of thanks becomes a tool for manifesting financial freedom. This is where discipline transforms, from forcing results to maintaining a steady internal state of abundance. This is the unraveling of scarcity-based patterns that once blocked prosperity. This is the recalibration, as your emotions tune to the high vibration of wealth. This is the ignition of a continuous flow of money, opportunities, and prosperity drawn naturally to you. This is the declaration that gratitude is now your ultimate wealth magnet. This is the first step into a life where appreciation fuels the expansion of your financial reality. Think of the moment when you hold a vivid, detailed vision of financial abundance, yet release all anxiety about how or when it will manifest. And can you imagine the liberation and clarity that comes from trusting the unseen while staying fully aligned with your inner state? This is where it begins, with the understanding that attachment to specific outcomes often blocks the natural flow of manifestation, while confident detachment allows the universe to deliver in its own perfect timing. This is how it unfolds, as you focus on the feeling of having already achieved your financial goals, letting go of struggle or insistence. This is where truth breaks through, when you see that control over timing is an illusion, and the only true control is over your inner state. This is why it matters, because tension and desperation weaken your magnetic field, while calm expectation strengthens it. This is where illusion fades, as the belief that you must force results gives way to patient, deliberate assumption. This is the turning point, when you embrace both clarity of vision and the serenity of detachment. This is where resistance softens, as impatience and doubt dissolve into unwavering trust. This is how awareness sharpens, when you notice that opportunities appear spontaneously as you remain internally aligned. This is where power returns, because detachment combined with clear assumption creates a potent field for abundance. This is the moment of clarity, when you realize that letting go is not giving up but a conscious act of faith. This is how alignment begins, as your inner world maintains unwavering certainty regardless of external circumstances. This is where fear dissolves, when the need to control outcomes is replaced by confident expectation. This is the awakening, where your mind becomes the calm center from which manifestation radiates effortlessly. This is where discipline transforms from overthinking and chasing to consistent inner alignment. This is the unraveling of tension, worry, and limiting expectations. This is the recalibration, as you learn to combine desire with serene trust. This is the ignition of a powerful, effortless flow of wealth and opportunities. This is the declaration that detachment does not weaken manifestation, but strengthens it infinitely. This is the first step into a reality where vision and inner peace work together to produce extraordinary abundance. Ask yourself what happens when every ounce of your energy, attention, and intention is fully synchronized with the flow of opportunity, and can you imagine how effortlessly life presents circumstances that perfectly match your assumed wealth and inner certainty? This is where it begins, with the understanding that energy is the invisible currency that directs circumstances toward you, far more than effort or external strategies alone. This is how it unfolds. As you cultivate awareness of your own vibrational state, adjusting feelings, thoughts, and focus to align consistently with prosperity. This is where truth breaks through, when you notice that doors begin opening in unexpected ways, and connections appear precisely when needed. This is why it matters, because unaligned energy attracts delay, friction, and missed opportunities, while synchronized energy draws effortless results. This is where illusion fades, as the misconception that hustle alone produces wealth collapses under the clarity of aligned consciousness. This is the turning point, when deliberate focus replaces scattered effort and confusion. This is where resistance softens, as alignment with inner certainty dissolves doubt and hesitation. This is how awareness sharpens, when you see patterns of synchronicity and opportunity emerge naturally around you. This is where power returns, because fully synchronized energy creates an unstoppable current of attraction. This is the moment of clarity, when you realize that wealth flows most powerfully when your internal state and external actions are harmonized. This is how alignment begins, as your mind, body, and feelings operate in unison with abundance. This is where fear dissolves, when impatience, worry, and misalignment are replaced by confident expectation. This is the awakening, where opportunity seems to appear as if guided by invisible hands, perfectly timed for your success. This is where discipline transforms from random attempts into deliberate, conscious alignment of energy. This is the unraveling of scattered efforts, wasted time, and misaligned focus. This is the recalibration, as your energy becomes a precise magnet for wealth and opportunity. This is the ignition of a life where every thought, feeling, and action resonates with prosperity. This is the declaration that synchronized energy is the most powerful mechanism for financial manifestation. This is the first step into a reality where opportunities flow effortlessly into the life you assume and embody. Can you imagine waking each day fully aware that you are not merely seeking wealth, but actively creating it through every thought, feeling, and assumption? And can you feel the empowerment that comes from realizing you are the conscious architect of your financial reality? This is where it begins, with the recognition that true prosperity is born from deliberate awareness and consistent embodiment of abundance. This is how it unfolds, as you consciously choose your inner state, deliberately feeling the satisfaction, freedom, and confidence of having already achieved your goals. This is where truth breaks through, when you notice that circumstances, opportunities, and people naturally align with the consciousness you maintain. This is why it matters, because your level of awareness directly determines the magnitude and speed of your financial results. This is where illusion fades, as the belief that external factors control your wealth collapses under the clarity of conscious creation. This is the turning point, when every decision, thought, and emotion becomes a deliberate act of manifestation. This is where resistance softens, as inner certainty replaces doubt, hesitation, and external fear. This is how awareness sharpens, when you begin to sense the subtle laws of attraction and consciousness at work in your life. This is where power returns, because conscious creation allows you to command circumstances without struggle. This is the moment of clarity, when you realize that every financial achievement is a reflection of inner state rather than external effort alone. This is how alignment begins, as daily choices, attention, and energy consistently embody wealth consciousness. This is where fear dissolves, when insecurity, scarcity, and comparison are replaced by trust in your creative power. This is the awakening, where every action becomes an expression of assumed abundance, effortlessly generating results. This is where discipline transforms from mechanical striving into deliberate conscious manifestation. This is the unraveling of all habits, thoughts, and beliefs that contradict the wealth creator you are becoming. This is the recalibration, as your consciousness tunes perfectly to the frequency of unlimited prosperity. This is the ignition of a life where money, opportunity, and abundance flow naturally in alignment with your inner state. This is the declaration that you are now fully empowered as a conscious wealth creator, capable of manifesting extraordinary financial reality. This is the first step into a life where every day, thought, and feeling contributes to the expansion of your wealth, power, and freedom, now fully realized and lived.